Hello? Hi. Hey, good morning, guys. Good. We are doing all right. We had the coffee, we had the tea. Right, today is the last day, and we're going to start straight away with an amazing keynote. Alasdair, who most of you will know from posting a lot of maps, a lot of population-centered gravity maps and fancy projections. So, no, it's going to be a great day. I'm going to say a few words after the keynote, and then we're going to have more sessions here. We're going to split the room. There will be tea and coffee, and then lunch, and then more sessions in the afternoon. Workshops as well. And yeah, if I haven't talked to you yesterday, I hope you meet me at some point today, because I really would like to have a word with everyone attending and really enjoy the day. Alasdair?
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks very much for inviting me. So what I'm going to do is talk a bit about biographical stuff and motivations and the point of open source. And seeing as how you're all open source geniuses, I don't need to say any of this, but I will do. I'll also mention a little bit about Albert Einstein. And then I'll leave it at the end talking about trust, which I think is probably the most important thing that we need to think about these days. And then there's some pictures and maps, obviously. And I'm going to start my 20-minute timer. And then when someone puts up that stop now thing, I probably won't see it. But when my phone buzzes, I'll try and be near to the end. So my talk's called Getting to the Point, and hopefully, like you guys, I am fascinated by people and places, and I like fiddling about with maps, and I sort of quite like being confused if I can get past that point to solve problems with spatial things. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think about as my personal source code. And actually, when I was watching Barry Rowlinson's talk yesterday, talking about background and motivations, it makes me think about how all our individual journeys, our interests, our skills, our degrees, all the different things within the background, getting us to this point. For me, that's where a lot of the richness of open source and the community comes from. So I'm going to talk about that. Tiny bit self-indulgent maybe, but let's go for it. So my personal source code is, of course, very buggy. I'm going to go back to when I was at high school. These two fellows. We've got von Thunen, which I was immensely bored by in geography at high school. And that's my first very bad geography joke, because that's Kristaller, famous for central place theory. And I went to a school called the IRA in Inverness, which was probably more violent. But it sounds posh because it was called Inverness Royal Academy. But that's when I first really discovered what they call human geography and maps and stuff. And I actually was really bored, and I just did doodles of what I thought these guys looked like. But that was my starting point in all this kind of geographical stuff. I didn't know anything about GIS, and certainly not open source. And my background in the Highlands, I'm from Inverness, and I spent most Saturdays, unfortunately, I thought, watching 3rd Division shinty by the shores of Loch Ness. And eventually I started playing basketball. That's what I did. So I was travelling around, so I spent my time in the Highlands all over the place, and then I got into basketball, and that's me standing beside Shaq in Frankfurt in 1994. And he looked really, really unhappy to be doing that. But that was interesting. So travelling around with these things, with various kinds of sports, and that's what partly has brought me to where I am. More recently, thinking about where I spent a lot of my time growing up, that's the west side of the Isle of Lewis, where my mum grew up. That's with a couple of years ago when my older son, Finlay, climbed up a hill. And in the background, what I've put up there actually is this huge, huge new wind farm planned, Sporran na Mara, Spirit of the Sea. I think the tip of the blade is going to be about 300 metres, so it's pretty big. It's not built yet, but that's my mum's village in the background, and that little picture of a black house is where my mum grew up until she was about 10 years old. I mean, it is a medieval dwelling, pretty much. So the reason you spell my name the way you do is my mum's a Gaelic speaker, that's the first language. And so I've done a lot of mapping of different things, language maps. So the village in the west side of Lewis where my mum's from, and when I spent a lot of my youth is Shawbist, and the percentages there, the numbers are a percent of people who spoke Gaelic in the 2011 census. It's gone down since then. And actually when I was making a map like this, looking at the percentages of people who speak Gaelic in Inverness in each area, I was trying to figure out how many of them I knew. So I know the data's anonymized, but I was trying to think of Mary Mackay, Joe McDonald. Anyway, so you can anonymize data, but someone will always find out. As far as mapping and stuff goes, I guess many of us will do this. We have personal things that we do. Like I was going on a walk with some mates from Kinlochhourn in the West Highlands all the way to Inveree in Knoydart, this area. It's pretty rough. It's a 15-mile walk. There's frequently stories in The Guardian and The Telegraph about Britain's remotest pub, which is at Inveree. I mean, it's remote in a UK sense, but it's hardly Canadian remoteness. Anyway, we were there, made a map. That's me halfway through. It rained for about 10 hours. And another day we were going up to this river, hopefully being able to walk across it, which we did do, and we were getting changed and putting our socks back on. And a young French woman who's walking her dog around Scotland got the fright of her life with 6 big hairy guys standing on the edge of the river. But anyway, making maps, Highlands, all these kind of things are what I did. So the point in terms of what brought me here in terms of knowledge, Mariam yesterday was talking about her background. I did an undergraduate geography degree, a master's in geography in America, a PhD in sort of urban policy. Then I was at Manchester for a bit, did some academic stuff, and now I do consulting with a small company, Automatic Knowledge. And these are the points along the way that have brought me to here, thinking about these kinds of things. I do sometimes like to make geography jokes as well. I know it's really bad, sorry. But the source of one of the line simplification algorithms that we use was algorithm Wyatt. Did come from Hull, so there's a connection there, not completely tenuous. So I like the sort of fun geography stuff, the map stuff, but I also really like the technical stuff. I enjoy that, and that's why it's nice coming here, because there's so many incredibly clever people. In fact, just about everyone I talk to here, I think, why they're really smart, I'm really stupid. But as far as the academic side of things, I always try to understand the background to things. That's me standing beside Waldo Tobler. I went to visit him a few years ago. He died a few years ago. That's in University of Santa Barbara, or UC Santa Barbara. And they have skateboard lanes, which I thought was quite amazing. So talking about the first law of geography, I also always did a lot of statistical work, spatial autocorrelation, all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of my background, things I'm interested in. It's all about people and places. And then as I was thinking about this, I was looking at the program and all the talks, and so many subject areas I know nothing about, but I want to go to all the talks. So then I was thinking about what drives us, and I was thinking about this, like ambition. Have I been ambitious? Yes, I think so in some areas. Boredom was a huge motivator for me in lots of areas, similar to some other people. Imagination, definitely, and that's for me one of the really great things about open source. I'm not bashing proprietary software here by saying this, but I feel the ability to use things in imaginative ways is really great for the open source. Procrastination, for sure. That's been a big driver. Desperation, sometimes desperation, I've promised a client that I can do something, thinking I probably can, then it comes to it, total panic, and through desperation I eventually get to the answer. Most recently, I was trying to figure out how to get some algorithm up and running, and I was just panicking, and I figured it out in a Costa Coffee in Doncaster. So anyway, frustration, confusion, curiosity, but the two things for me, imagination and curiosity, thinking about open source, for me, that's why I probably love it. Anyway, I was looking at the program, and I was thinking, the paths we travel are just so important, and these are our own personal source code kind of things. And then I was looking at a couple of talks, Joe Cook. I think this is the kind of stuff about standards. A lot of people, no offense to Joe, but I love this too, thinking about standards and how certain things can be really dull, but they're actually really exciting. Or Barry's talk yesterday, which was amazing if anyone was there. It's just the ability to use your imagination and freedom, and a lot of that comes through collaboration as well. So for me, it all leads to Leeds. My main points, which I've got enough time for, these are my semi-structured thoughts. That's Einstein. This is probably the key thing. I thought I'd put this up in case I run out of time. For me, the point of open source is freedom, trust, and collaboration. And freedom for me means freedom to create, explore, think original thoughts, and that's really, really important. It's about imagination for me, I think, in terms of freedom. Trust, I think trust is incredibly important for many, many reasons, but I'd say in the last few years, particularly with the rise of AI, that's not the rise of Al. We need to start using serif fonts when we're talking about AI, because every time I see that, I think they're talking about Al. Which is not good. Collaboration as well, though. This the collaboration thing is fantastic. There's sort of all kinds of collaboration. I remember once asking somebody on Twitter how to do something. It was a script or something, and they gave me the solution. But then I was too embarrassed to admit that I didn't know how to implement it. But a few years later, I did. So sometimes the collaborations that we have take some time. Sometimes they're instant. And in terms of freedom, this is a very famous kind of cliche quote: "Imagination is more important than knowledge." And people use these things and need to take them out of context. If you go and look at the original article by George Viereck from the Saturday Evening Post in 1929, you'll see the conversation Einstein was having. And I think I've always sort of believed this: imagination is more important than knowledge, because there's a lot of very, very clever people, but I think the ability to have the imagination to find innovative solutions, again, is a core component of open source. Is that supposed to do that? No, it's not. Okay, I don't know where that trust thing came from. That's not supposed to be there, trust me. That's supposed to come up later. Weird. Okay, but another one of his quotes was about how imagination circles the world. And that's inspiring in a way, because I think with the kind of stuff we do here, open source, that's what it's all about for me. Having the imagination is great, and having the tools that will fit your imagination is really crucial. He also has some interesting quotes from this piece as well. The 20th century has established the democracy of the intellect. This is just some dots on a map showing people who are taking some of my online courses. And it's interesting to see every morning I wake up and I answer questions from people. One's an intro QGIS course. There's a couple more, but there's an intermediate one as well. And I answer questions from people all over the world, almost 180 countries. If anyone knows anyone in Madagascar who wants to do a GIS course, let me know. I'll give them free access. I don't know what I've done wrong. But I think the 20th century, so this idea of the democracy of the intellect is another one that's fascinating to me. Going back to 2014, I did a course for the Royal Statistical Society, intro mapping data analysis with QGIS at Sheffield Uni, where I worked at the time. A couple of folk from the Financial Times graphics and visual journalism team came on that. They went back and said, well, we could use this, and that would free us up to do things quickly. And one of the guys who's still at the FT, John Byrne-Murdoch, he described what they do as social science on a deadline, and they do some great stuff. So that was interesting. Liz and Cleve came in the course. They went back to the newsroom and said to Steve Bernard, who's really great, we could use this tool, this open source tool for the whole workflow. Steve started doing some stuff, and then he was a bit stuck, and he wanted more freedom to do something. So we contacted Michael Min, one of these polymath plugin developers. He said, could you make it do this? He said, okay, great idea, and he came back and he's updated it. Now, for me, that kind of speed of turnaround, that kind of creativity and freedom is another great thing about open source. I'm not going to talk about this stuff too much. So I got ChatGPT to do a really bad graphic about proprietary software versus open source. And there's this kind of tension, and people talk about it this way. I don't necessarily buy that, but for me, it's I like transparency. But the interesting quote from Einstein from the piece about paying most for the things one gets for nothing. People sometimes say that about open source. I don't go along with that. But of course, we think about free. We don't pay money, but we pay in other ways. So this is really not something I want to talk about too much, but I think there's this tension that is always there. For me, it's just about having the freedom to do stuff. And it doesn't have to be open source, but for me, that's what works best. And this is the crux of it. If I know what's in it, I'll trust it more, obviously, unless it's haggis. And I think that's kind of a key thing. Sometimes I remember telling somebody, oh, this is open source, it's really, really great, look at all the stuff you can do with it. And, not everyone agrees, that's fine. But I think if I trust, I'll trust it. And I think trust today, when there's so much of the problems, I think, in the world at the moment are associated with lack of trust and untrustworthiness. But I say you can trust me because I did this text map, and that's surely trustworthy. The BBC's election graphics, Philip Brown and myself, what we did was we thought it'd be a good idea to create a new hex map layout for the 2024 election because the constituencies had changed. We spent ages arguing about should Anglesey be one hexagon away or should it be joined. We decided eventually, because it had a bridge, we should join it. The BBC decided they'd move it. But that's a layout we did. Then we decided, I'm not a massive fan of hex maps in a way because of the shape and because I'm from the Highlands. Like, I want my area to be big, and how dare you make it a tiny little hexagon. But my solution to this is usually to use both of them, use both kinds of maps. So but this is the process. So we document the process. When we were doing this, we thought about end users from the beginning. The whole point of this project was to make sure that people could use something, they know what was in it. So what we did was, I printed out these big hex sheets, and we played around with for ages with it. We also developed a 3-letter code for each one so we can know what it was. I will share the link to the slides. I probably should have done that already so you can share it. But we shared all the files as well in all sorts of formats, I think from shapefile to GeoJSON, anything that people might want to use. So I think the transparency thing is crucial. Collaboration, this is really just a bit about procrastination because I mentioned it, but it can be productive. So collaboration and open source, this is a project I did with a guy in the States, Garrett-Nelson, and this is an algorithm called Combo that was developed by researchers at MIT. It's a network partitioning algorithm, but all you really need to know is it does stuff like that. If you've got flow lines, commuting, phone calls, all that kind of stuff, it will partition it based on the strength of connection between lines. So we thought we would do that. That's Garrett-Nelson, my collaborator. His middle name, or his second name, is actually Dash, which causes endless amounts of confusion. But his parents weren't to know that the Dash would be so popular these days. So we did this, and if anyone's done anything in the US, they'll know half the project is always about leading zeros on FIPS codes. So we sorted that one out, and then we mapped 4 million commutes, and we put it through the algorithm, and it spits out communities, which are the coloured blobs in the maps. We wrote stuff about cities and mega city regions. We did a book chapter. That really started off because Garrett was finishing his PhD and I was doing something in my job at university that I didn't like, so we were both looking for something to do that wasn't that, and it worked quite well. We've done this for various areas since. I've done it for credit card spending data for the UK, but it's interesting when you do this, you look at the results and you think, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's really good. But for me, that comes out of collaboration. On my own, I had an idea about what to do, but to be honest, looking back, my ideas were a bit rubbish. But I did some of the technical stuff, we did some of the other stuff, and then we moved it on through collaboration. And I think the way it works for me, if I'm thinking about collaboration, usually it's inspiration, next imagination, and motivation, and that equals a groovy life. So I think collaboration is the other key thing. Where the heck is he going with all this? Well, for me, I think the collaboration element is the superpower of open source. And that's kind of an obvious point if we think about the big open source projects like Linux, for example. So that's why it's great to be here, to see other people doing stuff, to get ideas, to apply things I would never even think about to my own work. And we've got 3 minutes left in the slide, it says, and I've got 3 minutes 41 left, so I'm doing okay. So I think, if I was to try and sum all this up, I've talked about a lot of things, but I think the most essential part of open source, more important now than ever, is trust. Quip about Haggis, of course. I'm not a big fan of Haggis because I know what's in it. But the opposite is true for me for open source. I can see what's in it, I can see changes that have been made, I can see who the contributors are. Maybe sometimes they'll even spot mistakes, but more likely, people will spot mistakes in what I've done. And I had a very famous example. I was doing a piece of research for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and it was to do with commute data, which the ONS released, and they call it origin destination data. Fine. But the file they publish has destination in the first column and then origin in the next column. So we did this, and then somebody tried to replicate our work, somebody at the University of Manchester, and they sent nice emails saying, oh, I've tried to replicate this, can't quite get the same results. So I think at first I ignored the first email for a few weeks because I wanted to have the chance to investigate. And it turned out they were right. But and then I was like, okay, what do I do? So I owned up. I said to the client, look, it's messed up. But it didn't actually change the conclusions, thankfully. We just had to put a footnote on a few maps and change some colors. But for me, that was good because I was able to say then, well, let's fix this, and then also say for future projects, you might want to recommend that people publish the full method and they do all this. So I mean, it's obvious, but I think the trusting is important. That's a real photo, trust me, ChatGPT. But I think these three elements, the trust, I just see there's so much distrust, lack of trust. You think about this all the time. For me, that's one of the real benefits of open source. And 2 more slides, we've got about a minute left. I'm definitely going to pick this as the most important thing. I don't think this can exist without freedom, and it can grow with collaboration. So Linus's law, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. I think that's certainly true. And you see that as well, not so much these days with the sort of demise of Twitter, but previously you post any kind of map or spatial thing on Twitter and somebody's going to pop up and say, you're a loser, that map sucks. Usually one of about 3 people. But there's lessons to be learned, and that's one of the things I think from this, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, maybe that's probably true. So for the final minute, I'll let you look at a map I made, and maybe you can just try and spot all the things that are wrong with it. Actually, there's one correct city, and a few other things are messed up. The thing about this is, I always think that these kind of maps are quite interesting because it relates to an individual. So if you were from, let's say you were from, I don't know, let's choose somewhere far away. So if you were from DRC or Vietnam and you've never spent any time in the UK or looking at UK maps, you'd probably look at that for quite a while and think, seems all right. But the closer you are to it, the more wrong you see. But we always first look at our areas that we're in, and then we look at the areas that we've been to or we know. So I'm from Inverness, which is in Shetland. I've moved Shetland, I've moved Orkney, I've flipped the Western Isles, I've flipped the Isle of Man, and I've used a little bit of code to flip out places, and the only one that's right is Leeds. So that's the other thing as well, that, like, the final point about this maps, we have this level of trust that we ascribe to them, and sometimes that's not a good thing. That is 20 minutes. So I'm going to dismiss that message. I'm going to stop there. That's it really, something to start the day, a few thoughts. Trust super important, but collaboration and freedom for me is what open source gives us. Thanks.